Hey, hey, welcome to the Backyard Professor live stream. I am here with my good friend Charlie Harrell tonight, and we have a fantastic lineup. I've noticed in the chat you're asking where everybody is. Charlie just informed me that tonight is the All-Star game, so it's just us small groupies here.
Not a basketball fan.
I am too, kind of, but yeah, so we're making a sacrifice for the kingdomless.
Right.
Let's go ahead and get this show on the road. Then I've got a couple of announcements, and then Charlie's going to share some of the most interesting ideas on wondering what was restored that we've ever heard. So let's get this show on the road. All right. I've got just a couple of quick things to say, and then we'll jump right into this, Charlie. How you been anyway?
How have I been?
Yeah.
Oh, I've been great. I'm down in St. George this weekend, so enjoying the warm climate.
Nice. Please keep the warmth there because I'm going to be there next weekend for Thrive. It's going to be my first Thrive I've attended. I know Radio Free Mormon and Bill Rill are both speaking there, and they're going to be there. I'm looking forward to meeting everybody. Maven will be there, so I know that because I'm picking her up in Salt Lake City and taking her down from Salt Lake City to St. George. So we'll have a lot of fun down there. And of course, I'm going to take a boatload of videos. So another thing I'd like to tell the audience real quick is I do have new videos up on my last Monday's escapade into Salt Lake City. It was the first time where I've seen the City Creek Mall. I spent the afternoon in Salt Lake City, and I was invited for a premiere of the film of The Return of Elder Pingree, an Emmy Award-winning filmmaker. And I was able to chat with Steve Pinecker of Mormon Book Reviews and Rebecca Biblioteca of Mormon-ish, and several other people. I saw Maven there, and I met Lila. And so we had a great time. So I've got several videos up. I've got a few BYP Responds videos. And tonight I have once again my good friend Charlie Harrell, where we are basically going to talk about Chapter 3, Joseph Smith and the Restoration. We're actually going through his book chapter by chapter. Charlie is being very gracious with his time, for which I'm very thankful and happy. This book, that's a backyard professor move. This is my doctrine, the development of Mormon thinking. I love this book because it is not full of polemic. It's 600 pages. It's thorough. It's not polemical. It's not bias. It's not, and I know there's going to be people who say, yeah, well, that's phony, but it's not an argumentative book. It is exploratory and it is analytical. And the thing I love about what Charlie has done in every chapter, you guys, is he goes to the Old Testament, he goes to the New Testament, he goes to the Doctrine and Covenants, the Book of Mormon, early Mormonism, today's Mormonism? How has the church used the biblical scriptures to justify their doctrines or to interpret them, etc.? And it is so awesome because you're getting a bird's eye view as well as a pinpoint detailed look. And I don't know how you pulled that off still to this day, Charlie, but seriously, it's a fantastic book. So let's get started on Joseph Smith and the Restoration. What did he restore, Charlie?
Very good question, right? So just for a little bit of context, last time we talked about the great apostasy and the proof texts that were used and are still used today to justify that there was a great apostasy. And of course, what that means, did that mean initially in the church that there was just an apostasy from the pure doctrines of the Bible and of the New Testament and the gifts of the Spirit, as even many Methodists and other evangelicals claimed, and which is proclaimed in the Book of Mormon? Or was there an apostasy that forced a withdrawal of the priesthood from the earth and the true church organization, which is the narrative that gradually developed in the church? So today we have a similar kind of a problem with the restoration. As you asked the question, what exactly was restored and what was this restoration thing? Well, the restoration, the whole concept of a restoration was not new in Joseph Smith's day, beginning back in even the 16th century with the Anabaptists and other radical reformationists who said we got to go more than just reform the church. We've got to restore the church back to its pristine purity. And
so they were talking restoration specifically, weren't they?
Yes.
Yeah. They were mentioning it as that, getting back to the early Church of Jesus.
That's right.
That's what they meant. So that wasn't really unique in Joseph Smith's day then.
No, not at all. And in fact, there were a lot of different movements. There were the Restorationists. In fact, they were called the Restorationist movement, or the Restitutionist is the term used in the King James Version of Acts 3:19-21 that we'll talk about later. But they were also called Primitivists. And most scholars just kind of use those terms interchangeably. The Restorationists, Primitivists, they were all about the same kind of thing of returning to primitive Christianity. The difference in within the movement was that some of them said, all we need to do is restore the Christian teachings of the New Testament. We need to return to the practical Christianity of the New Testament. Others said we need to reclaim the practices and doctrines of the New Testament. Others that we have to return to the spiritual gifts that were practiced in the New Testament and enjoy those gifts again. Of course, the Book of Mormon talks about those aspects of restoration, but that's the extent of it. But there were other restorations.
There's a telltale clue right there, what we're looking at, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the Book of Mormon just picks up right in stride with evangelical thinking of the day and restorationist thinking, at least at that level. But there were other primitivists who were saying we need to also return to the church organization that existed in the primitive church. So I see where Dan is talking about Campbellism, which said we need to return, or we have the forms without the power. We need to return and put the power back into it.
Yeah.
Or Sidney Rigdon picked up on that same theme, and that's probably what drew him to the Book of Mormon, is that he was excited that the Book of Mormon was preaching we can't do away with the spiritual gifts.
Right.
But of course, Rigdon went one step further, and he wanted to return to the organization as well. He thought that that the apostleship and the order and communitarianism, that those were all aspects of the New Testament that had to be restored and practiced again.
So Rigdon, now interestingly, in my apologetics time, I wasn't really hot into church history, and I am really jumping in it now. Dan Vogel's here, and he and I are going to do a series of ideas on priesthood in Mormonism. But Rigdon actually was far more influential than the church today's church, has ever led us to actually believe. I just acquired this book by Richard Van Wagner, and I know it's an older book. All of you guys have probably read it. I have not, but I've got another good friend who gets in the chat every now and then. I don't see him here yet, but he told me, man, do some stuff on Sidney Rigdon. So that's in the coming up works. And I think Dan and I will focus on, or at least discuss him also. But you have shown how Rigdon's influence was quite impressive later on with some of the unique ideas in Mormonism, rather than just this Campbellism Protestant interpretation that was held at first and reflected in the Book of Mormon. So it's kind of fun. Just there's an actual build up and development that goes with our hindsight. Tell me if I'm saying this wrong, but from our hindsight looking back, we can see a build-up and development and evolution of the doctrine as it got more and more and more and more all-inclusive, yet less biblical. Is that fair to say?
That's a very good point. In fact, I think early Mormonism was much closer to the way that most people and scholars would interpret the Bible than it was later in the Nauvoo period. And, when Joseph Smith started introducing a lot of these more esoteric kinds of doctrines, then he started appropriating scripture and
to justify his innovations.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
So I noticed that Dan was saying that Campbell rejected the gifts. That
I was just getting ready to post that. I'm so glad Vogel's here. So
yeah, that may be right. I don't recall exactly, but I know that he and Rigdon didn't see eye to eye.
Yeah.
And at least that was one of the things that was very appealing to Rigdon, was the gifts of the Spirit and the authority and church organization. So with this Second Great Awakening, that's when Restorationism or Primitivism reached its climax. With, in fact, Campbell claimed to restore the ancient order of things. But there were many movements at the time creating what they felt was a restoration of primitive Christianity. And many of them, in fact, I point out in the book that there were at least 6 that had the name of the church as the Church of Christ. And they rejected creeds of religions, which in fact, again, is exactly what the Book of Mormon was doing.
It is. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, that was somewhat surprising to me. This has been a few years back, but when I can't remember if it's in for Pete's sake, the big historian now, Richard Bushman, in his book Joseph Smith and the Beginnings of Mormonism, where he described the idea that there were many different restoration movements occurring in Joseph Smith's time and era. Now, that's not what I taught on my mission. That's not what I was ever taught in my youth. So that was kind of a surprise to see. Well, there's more talk about this unique theme, because I was taught this is unique. None of the churches even believed in restoration. And now we're discovering, well, that's technically a misstatement at best.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember hearing in a conference talk where it was stated that no other church claimed to be the Church of Christ. There were these, at least they didn't have that name. And as a matter of fact, they all claimed that they were the Church of Christ, but they just didn't have that as their proper name. But there were several churches called the Church of Christ. And so it wasn't that that was anything unique.
Right.
And they rejected creeds and very similar to the kinds of beliefs that are espoused and promoted in the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the milieu there at the time of Joseph Smith, so that when he came along, he fit right into that general lay of the land of Restorationism. Yeah. So what I do in chapter 3 is I'm interested in looking, first of all, at the prophetic calling of Joseph Smith. How was the restoration specifically through the prophet Joseph Smith, foreseen in biblical prophecies?
This will be good. This will be good. Yeah.
So as we look at a couple of these, they really fit the category that I talk about in chapter 1, which is the concept of proof texting. That these are passages that, when looked at in their context and historical setting, had nothing to do with any kind of latter-day work that was going on or anything to do with Joseph Smith. Yeah. Now, when I say it doesn't have to do with the latter days is mentioned in ancient prophecies, but because they believed that they were living in the latter days. But it had no reference to modern day periods.
Which was still thousands of years off.
Yes. Yeah. So that just does not hold up as you look at those passages that are cited. So the first two Old Testament passages that are taken as prophecies of Joseph Smith that I look at are in Isaiah 29, verses 4 and 12 specifically. Now, we know that Isaiah 29 is the great chapter on the Book of Mormon, right? It talks all about the Book of Mormon.
I baptize people based on that concept, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Working a wonder. There it is.
He did.
Restoration of the gospel. But specifically, verse 4 talks about the inhabitants of Jerusalem who would be destroyed and who would speak out of the ground. And it says their voice would be, quote, as one that hath a familiar spirit, unquote. So a couple things to note here. The idea of a familiar spirit, as I'm sure your listeners know or aware of, it's an archaic way of referring to a medium or a necromancer who speaks for the dead. Or the dead speaks through them. And so the whole idea of that likening of the nation of Jerusalem to one that hath a familiar spirit was to say that their voice would be so low and hardly audible as a familiar spirit would be, one speaking through a familiar spirit or possessed with this familiar spirit, that they would hardly be noticeable. And we've taken the Book of Mormon in particular looks at that idea. Now, here's where the Book of Mormon at least gets this part of Isaiah correct. It recognizes that the familiar spirit is a medium talking in behalf of the dead, or the dead talking through this medium, that medium being Joseph Smith.
Uh,
So that's where that comes.
making it relevant to him.
Right. So where initially this passage is referring to the nation of Jerusalem, nothing about a Nephite people, and it's talking about ancient Jerusalem, not something that would happen in the latter days, in modern times. And the metaphor is one that is trying to convey this idea that the nation of Jerusalem is no longer audible. They're not of significance anymore. But we've taken that, we've literalized that to represent Joseph Smith, literally speaking on behalf of the ancient inhabitants of America, the Nephites.
The dead people.
Yeah. So instead of this occurring contemporaneous with the demise of the nation of Jerusalem, the Book of Mormon has it occurring some 1,400 years later. So the Book of Mormon gets neither the time, the place, nor the people, nor the metaphorical significance correct. It misses on all counts.
All counts, yeah. That's so interesting. But then, every church was doing that with the Bible. Have we actually changed with the way we approach the Bible yet? I don't know. What do you think? I'm trying to take you.
Yeah. Great question. And you wonder, it'd be interesting to do a study. In this particular verse, we've actually gotten worse. As I said, the Book of Mormon at least got the metaphor kind of correct.
Yeah.
But now
we don't.
If you listen to, and I've heard many teachers, commentaries, Book of Mormon commentaries, and even in general conference, talk about this notion of a familiar spirit, signifying that the Book of Mormon would have a familiar ring to it. And so it totally misses the whole point of what the familiar spirit
what we've done is we've ignored the Hebrew context and brought on our own. Oh, hey, yeah, the Book of Mormon sounds like the Bible. That's pretty familiar.
Yes, yeah. So we've got this simplistic colloquialization of biblical phraseology to mean something that is just totally hokey. So anyway, moving on to the other verse in that same chapter, in verse 12, where the Israelites are being condemned for their disobedience. And so God says, you're totally out of touch, and you can no more discern the vision I'm trying to show you and teach you than an unlearned person can understand a book because they don't know how to read, or a learned person can understand the words of a sealed book because they're sealed. So they're that closed off to you. So here again, we've literalized that to be an actual book that would come forth in modern times. And this isn't even a prophecy at all. It's just a declaration of the current situation of Israel. And yet here we've catapulted that whole thing into the latter times and had it be Joseph Smith not being able to read the book because he's unlearned. And you have the Charles Anton incident and how that was crafted to fit a literalization of this passage. So it's all messed up.
Yeah, and this passage is actually a metaphor for the ancient Israel, what was happening to them then.
That's all it is.
And we literalize that metaphor into a historical situation.
Right. And into a prophetic, one to happen into the future, where in context, it's just simply a declaration of the current situation of Israel at that time.
Fascinating.
So again, the Book of Mormon gets it wrong on several levels, including the time, the place, and the analogical meaning of the passage. So it's just interesting how...
Well, the good news now is the church has surpassed the Book of Mormon in getting it all completely, totally wrong, thanks to Joseph Smith literalizing it.
Right.
That's crazy, Charlie.
It gets pretty wild, doesn't it?
Am I extending that too far? I'm trying to be fair here, but it appears to me the way you broke this down is so awesome on page 51 and 52 of your book. Our literalization just completely wrecks everything.
Yes, yeah. And that was Joseph Smith's tendency. And I think it was a tendency of, the frontier religions to kind of have that literalizing and to be interpreting the Bible as being fulfilled through them in their time.
And if those other groups were trying to literally restore the Church of Christ, that makes sense that everybody probably bent themselves to a more literal view. I mean, Sidney Rigdon really jumped on that one with the gifts, didn't he?
He did. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I noticed that Dan said that some have argued that Nephi interpolated Isaiah 29. And that's exactly what's going on with scholars in the church today. They're recognizing that we are way off base to say that this is a prophecy, that Isaiah 29 is a prophecy of the Book of Mormon. They recognize it really has nothing to do with the Book of Mormon. And so they justify or rationalize the interpretation of Isaiah 29 as a prophecy of the Book of Mormon. That interpretation that is found in the Book of Mormon, they say, oh, that's just Nephi likening the scriptures to themselves.
To themselves, yeah. Well, but that's what Joseph Smith did.
He did.
He did the same thing. Well, yeah, that was me and Martin Harris and Anthony and Mitchell.
Yes.
Yeah, I had Colby Townsend on a couple months ago, and he was basically showing the same thing, that in fact Joseph Smith didn't actually put this all together as an actual prophecy to tell Martin Harris about until way later. Yeah, he had reread it later and made it look good. So interesting.
It is interesting. So the question then is that what Nephi was really doing? Was he simply likening it? Was he adapting the language of Isaiah to fit his own prophecy? Or was he actually interpreting Isaiah as a reference, as a prophecy of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon? And I point out in my book, I give 3 or 4 reasons why it just can't be an adaptation. It was understood in the Book of Mormon by the angel Moroni when he explained it to Joseph Smith, by Joseph Smith himself. That's the way God explained it to Joseph Smith, as the interpretation, the fulfillment of Isaiah 29, the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. It's not just, we're just going to borrow this language from Isaiah 29 and create this prophecy of the Book of Mormon. So it's very problematic to try to say that it's just an interpolation.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, the same rationale, in fact, is used to argue that the Book of Mormon never claims that there were others in America, right? Book of Mormon doesn't say that. So, yeah, there were lots of people in the Americas. That's not precluded by the Book of Mormon. Or that the Book of Mormon never claims that the Book of Mormon geography covered North and South America. Or that the Lamanites were really cursed with a dark skin. That's not there.
Once you start down that, you can do it with everything.
Exactly. And so that's,
and they have done that with everything.
isn't that interesting?
Yeah, crazy. Huh. All right.
Oh, moving on. Malachi 3:1 is
Our
a
favorite
passage.
one. Yeah.
Carrie, do you want to read that? Do you have that handy there? Malachi 3:1.
Yeah, I've got my Bible right here. I've got your book open, but shame on me. I'm reading the philosophy of men mingled with Scripture, not Scripture itself. Okay, hang on. It'll take me just one quick sec. That's 3:1, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, this is really we are the only ones in the world who have I mean, the Jews just do an eye roll when we explain this. Okay. Behold, I will send my messenger, and he shall prepare the way before me. And the Lord whom ye seek shall suddenly come to his temple, even the messenger of the covenant whom ye delight in. Behold, he shall come, saith the Lord of hosts. Want me to read 2 also?
No, that's good. And of course, this is before the one where we talk about Elijah coming to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, children to fathers.
That's not till 1836, is it?
Yes, right. Although it was referred to prior to that. We'll get into in another chapter. But here, we look at this and we think, okay, if God's going to send a messenger before the second coming, doesn't this just beautifully fit into the LDS narrative of, well, obviously that messenger has to be Joseph Smith. He's the one that the Lord sent to prepare the way for the second coming. But then, of course, in the New Testament, that messenger ends up being
Elias.
Elias and John the Baptist.
John the Baptist.
Being the messenger before the first coming.
Who, according to some biblical scholarship now, the way Jesus presented the Baptist when they asked, well, who is Elias and all, Jesus said, well, Elias has already come. It was John the Baptist.
Exactly.
He came as a reincarnation of him, not as a type and shadow. John the Baptist was understood to be Elias.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, that's one interpretation I've read.
Yeah, that's one.
Well, we're talking fulfillment.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
400 years later, not 2,400 years later.
Right. But of course, did it refer to any of that at all? Scholars do suggest that this is the same messenger that is referred to later as Elijah, who would come and return, not restore all things, but turn the hearts of the children of the fathers, fathers of children. The reason why it says in the New Testament that Elias would come and restore all things is because the Septuagint is being used there in Matthew, and the restore is really to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, children to the fathers. It's that same concept. But anyway, this is another passage that has been applied to Joseph Smith. And when I say applied, that's the interpretation. And here we get into that fascinating thing in Mormonism of the multiple fulfillment too, right? That prophecies have multiple fulfillment. Not just that it can be adapted to multiple situations, but that it in fact had multiple situations in mind when it was uttered, that it would be fulfilled multiple times into the future.
I just watched Mormon Stories podcast with John DeLynn and Mike from LDS Discussions, and he had Nemo on, and he had Radio Free Mormon on as well, on the backtracked prophecies. And RFM made that point, and the point he made, I hope I'm not stealing your thunder, but RFM's in the audience, so this will please him that I'm mentioning him in a good way. He said the trick with the reason why there seems to be a need for the double fulfillment is because the first one failed.
There you go.
And you go, oh wow, what a concept. So thank you, Radio Free Mormon. Yeah, I'm going to steal your idea and help Charlie out here.
Yeah.
You don't need it, but
yeah, I heard that. I thought that was a classic comment about that. And in some cases, we do think that it was fulfilled, like the one with John the Baptist. We say, oh yeah, that was fulfilled then, but it's also fulfilled again with Joseph Smith. Literally, that's what Malachi saw.
I'm not going to be surprised if there's something happening so that we can say, look, it's again fulfilled 3 times with Russell M. Nelson.
Yeah. Especially.
I'm sincerely not trying to be mockery here. He wants so bad to have prophecy and revelation in the church right now. He's lowered the bar so low, which is unfortunate, that anything can be a prophecy and a fulfillment now. That's kind of why I bring that up. I mean, I did that response to Dallin Oaks on the prophecy of Spencer W. Kimball. I put that up on a video today that just blew me away. I said, that's not a prophecy, but Oaks specifically mentions Russell M. Nelson really liked that concept because Spencer W. Kimball prophesied. So I'm going to say that to show that prophecy is still here. So yeah, it just smacks of desperation as far as I'm concerned. So hate to be so skeptical, but
yeah. And my main purpose in critiquing these kinds of interpretations isn't to say the church is false, the church is completely out to lunch. It's to say, let's just acknowledge, like what LDS scholars are doing today, more and more, acknowledging what the Bible is actually saying, and say it's fine. We need to adjust our narrative, and that's fine. We can do that. We've done it before.
Right.
Let's do it again, so that it at least comes in line with scholarly, what current biblical scholarship is showing us.
Yeah, you guys, the church is not completely out to lunch. It's only 95% out to lunch. So calm down.
Just the interpretations, right? Okay, there are several other Old Testament prophecies I'm not going to spend a lot of time on. Isaiah 11:1 about the branch, the stem of Jesse, the rod coming out of the stem, a branch growing out of the roots. Of course, that's just all turned around. It's even in the Doctrine and Covenants. It's interpreted in this real convoluted way that gets Joseph Smith into the picture again as one of the fulfillments of that symbolism that's being presented there. And yet it's just so far away from what the contextual and scholarly interpretation is of that passage that it just is nonsense. 2 others that, just to touch on briefly because they're so related in the Old Testament, Deuteronomy 18:15, where it talks about the Lord would raise up unto thee a prophet from the midst of thee, of thy brethren. This is the Lord speaking to Moses, like unto me, unto him ye shall hearken. And then Isaiah 52:13-14, which speaks of the Lord's servant who would be exalted and extolled, though his visage was marred. Okay, both of those passages have been interpreted and been acknowledged in Christianity as being direct references to Christ.
Right.
Yeah. The New Testament even interprets it that way.
Yeah.
The Book of Mormon also interprets them that way. But then there are additional interpretations given that kind of squeeze Joseph Smith in there as a fulfillment of the prophecy as well. So once again, we've got dual fulfillment on both of these prophecies, where traditionally they've been understood to refer to Christ. And of course, in its historical context, neither one of them had reference to the future Messiah of Christ. They were just references to prophets that would follow on Moses, be his successors.
Right.
And then, of course, Isaiah 52 is generally considered to be the nation of Israel as a
The
whole.
nation. Yeah,
Right.
that would be the main Jewish exegesis.
Yes.
Of that instead of to an individual. That this is one area where the Jews really are specific. Rabbi Singer is on YouTube all over the place saying, you Christians have blown all of this way out wrong. I watched him on Derek Lambert's Myth Vision, where he just wiped out the Christian prophecies in the New Testament from the Old Testament. So we Mormons are twice removed from, not only have we got the Jewish context wrong, by putting in Joseph Smith on the Mormon context, everybody's rolling their eyes right now. Right. They're saying, you guys, you are whacked way out there in left field, man. So, yeah, but you mentioned something. It's kind of nice to know that there are some LDS scholars who appear to begin saying, okay, let's slow down here. Let's take another look, because we're getting caught with our pants down, man. This is not a good look for us. We really do have to let the Bible be the Bible here and quit trying to, bring it all so much into our day all the time in order to give a validity. And yet, they are talking about a restoration of what was had before.
Yeah.
So this gets sticky because of that particular stance, doesn't it?
Yeah. And when you say they're talking about that, there's also a new discourse about restoration that has emerged in the last decade or so, which is restoration not as a recovery of something that was lost or that existed before, but more as a refurbishment of what we have. So in other words, this is, the Givens concept of Joseph Smith being an eclectic sort of restorationist individual, where he took from his surrounding elements, pieced them together, and crafted a restoration, or what was as good as what he could recognize as a reproduction of early Christianity.
Well, that just sounds like all the Protestant sects of his day, doesn't it?
Yes, right.
That's what they were doing.
Yeah.
I mean, Dan Vogel is probably smiling big right now. So is D. Michael Quinn in his grave. Now, granted, you just made Hugh Nibley roll over. Congratulations in his grave. But yeah, I mean, that direction, it just appears to me that almost becomes inevitable at this point.
Yeah.
It just does.
Yeah. It's pretty wild. So, and then as you point out, it's these prophecies, scholars are recognizing these prophecies, many of which are not prophecies at all, but are just simply pronouncements about a situation that was in their day. A lot of the way that, or one of the ways that a lot of scholars are explaining that is through the use of the term application or adaptation, that it's not really a fulfillment, but we can apply the suffering servant sermon in Isaiah. We can apply that to Christ. We could apply that to Joseph Smith, even though that may not have been the historical sense or intent of the passage. So again, you shift the discourse a little bit, and you're satisfying the critics, but it is not
it still feels slippery a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Kind of like, I mean, bless his heart. He's given it his best shot. I get it. I do. And I'm actually beginning to like him a little more than I used to. But our friend Terrell Givens in The Pearl of Greatest Price, his theme of bricolage comes to mind.
Bricolage is another one, right?
And he's doing that with the Book of Abraham, and but if with what you're saying, to your point, you do that with the Bible, you do that with price, you do that with prophecies. I mean, where does that stop? Is that prophecy, and is that how a prophet functions, or is this creativity going on?
Yep. Yeah. And there's actually the problem here is you've got the claim. The claim is this is a restoration. This was brought back to earth.
Yeah.
It was, let's clear the playing field here, and let's bring back the pure thing that existed.
Yeah.
So you got that claim that's been going on. That's been the narrative in the church from the beginning. You've got the claim that is coming up against the reality. The historical reality, if we look at what Joseph Smith was actually doing, not what he claimed to be doing or what he thought he was doing, but what he was actually doing is very obviously a refurbishment. He was kind of grabbing pieces here and there, crafting like you say, very creatively. And, I'm not saying there was no inspiration involved. There could be lots of inspiration, but it was not a bringing back of something that was lost. It was crafting out of existing ideas, beliefs, practices, cultural ideologies, a new religion.
And isn't that the basis of the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible, utilizing Adam Clarke's commentary?
Yeah.
Or another example, and John Twetness from Farms showed me this. In fact, he got me the articles on the theme of baptism for the dead, the famous 1 Corinthians 15:29.
Yeah.
And yet, rather than a restoration of a practice of an ordinance under the Melchizedek priesthood occurring in the Jerusalem temple, you can't do that, man. That is pure eisegesis. That is just reading your later doctrine back into the Jerusalem temple. That just doesn't cut the mustard. So this is what we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Good point.
Interesting.
Yeah. The last one from the Old Testament is one that isn't there, that Joseph Smith put there. So here, when RFM talks about writing yourself back into, backdating prophecies, this is one Joseph Smith put in that was in the Book of Mormon. It's the prophecy of Joseph of old, who says that there will be a latter-day Joseph, right, who would be named after his father, who would also be Joseph. To put that prophecy into the mouth of Joseph of old, who lived how many millennia ago?
Yeah.
To say that, he saw Joseph Smith.
And it came through the Book of Mormon.
Yeah. So that was a pretty bold move for him to put that back into the JST, as we're talking about, Genesis 50:26-32. So, like you say, the JST was obviously more than Adam Clarke. It was Joseph Smith taking from places all over the place, including adding his own creativity to the text to create the kind of Bible that he would have wished the Bible was. to fit and to suit his
Oh,
purpose.
what a great way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it. Yeah, dang it. I want to be important. I want to be the man to restore this. So that means I have to have been in those ancient texts. And check this out. It happens to be in the Book of Mormon, so it's got to be in the Bible.
Yeah.
Now, maybe Joseph Smith didn't emphasize that as much as his followers. I'm not sure. I personally have not studied that angle, but it is in early Mormonism. It has to be because I was taught that in seminary class, and that was 1976 to 1979. So I know that's been in modern Mormonism.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, the trial of the stick of Joseph, Jack West.
Oh, yeah.
How many of us missionaries took that as samizdat materials under our lapels into our mission so that we could use it?
Yeah, that was pretty popular at the time.
Oh, it was the go-to source for scripture study.
Yeah, back in the day. So that closes out the Old Testament. Just briefly from the New Testament, there's no prophecy or passage in the New Testament that speaks specifically of Joseph Smith. Of course, there wasn't in the Old Testament either, but Joseph Smith conveniently inserted himself into a New Testament text as well. And this is Matthew 24:14. Which says, "And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come." Of course, we know in the JST that's modified to say that the gospel of the kingdom shall be preached again, because there had to be this restoration and second period of gospel proclamation, right?
Right.
And even though that's not what was in Matthew, he just envisioned the gospel being preached to all the world as it was progressing at the time.
All right.
But then Joseph Smith in Nauvoo said that the passage should read, quote, "The Lord in the last days would commit the keys of the priesthood to a witness over all people." So instead of preaching the gospel as a witness, the keys are going to be committed to a witness. So he completely
just that one little word. Isn't that astonishing? I have never noticed that detail.
Yeah.
Now you're saying this is in the JST?
No, it's not. It's in a sermon in Nauvoo where he talked about, he made that statement, gave that interpretation. And of course, this is when he was trying to bolster his authority. Another time he was trying to bolster his authority and show that, hey, I am that witness. Matthew saw me, or Christ prophesied of me in Matthew.
You know, there comes a point, Charlie, to where you go, that is just, I'm trying hard not to get in trouble here with the YouTube authorities, but I mean, that takes balls of brass, doesn't it? Come on, that is so brazen. Mm-hmm. It just kind of shocks you that Joseph Smith thinks he can do that and get away with it, for one thing. Because I know the Greek is not going to agree with that. I don't even have to look up the Greek to know it's not. And the Greek word "for" does not mean the Greek word "to." I guarantee you those two are going to be different, right?
Yep.
I'd stake my life on that without even knowing what those words are yet. But
right.
Isn't that astonishing that look, if Mary Baker Eddy would have done that, I mean, okay, here's a better example. Do not the Jehovah's Witnesses exactly do crap like that in the New Testament? And do we not kick them in the teeth for it?
Yeah.
John 1:1 is one of my examples. Fascinating. Wow.
It's amazing. So again,
just to see that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What I'd like to do now is just move on to, so these are prophecies that are not prophecies of Joseph Smith that are not of Joseph Smith.
Oh my!
That are in the Bible, and
This is crazy beans.
And that's part of the magic of Mormonism, right? There's something about it to feel like, wow, the Bible talks about Joseph Smith. He's mentioned in the Bible, just like he's mentioned in the Book of Mormon. Of course, we're not looking at Book of Mormon passages, which refer pretty explicitly to Joseph Smith,
Right.
but he was careful to insert his
well,
name.
There is on my mission, there is I'm going to look it up real quick in the Biblical Topical Guide. There is an Isaiah passage that we used on my mission, and I had a zone leader point this out to me, and he said, when people tell you that Joseph Smith is not in the Bible, and it's not gonna mention it, and I don't have it written down. It talks about something about the Smith will do something or other. And he said that is Joseph Smith's specific name.
Oh.
Well, of course, it was a metal smith. It was metallurgy, the context.
Yeah.
This guy was that determined to find a prophecy. And I promise, it's you keep talking. It's so ridiculous. I'm gonna go get it out of Strong's Concordance. You keep talking. I'll be right back.
Okay.
I promise.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, the naivete of
I told you I'm back.
The membership is amazing.
It's amazing, the mental gymnastics
to this stuff. Yeah.
Now, doesn't that also make us think? If you're that desperate, I mean, if you're that determined, which leads you to that desperation, that kind of desperation, any other religion trying to do this with so many disparate, odd and end scriptures scattered throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament, the Mormons would there's no way you're going to accept that on any other religion score.
That's right.
So if you're going to try to be fair, you simply have to say, we need to look at this again. That's what I call Mormonizing the Bible. That's what I've been preaching against since I quit being an apologist. That was my problem as an apologist.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's like Christians have Christianized the Old
Testament.
Here
we go. Yeah. Isaiah 44.
Oh.
I'm going to read this to you because it's amazing. And I'm embarrassed as hell to say this, but I did use this on my mission once.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I really did. I really did. Isaiah 44:12. The smith with the tongs both worketh in the coals. The tongs were the scriptures. The coals were the people. So he metaphors, he literalizes the smith and metaphors everything else. I mean, come on.
That's
isn't that great?
Yeah.
And worketh it with the strength of his arms. Joseph Smith has strong arms. He could pull anybody up. I mean, I'm proving to you Joseph Smith right here, pal.
Oh, yeah.
Just, yea, he is hungry. Yeah? How many times did Joseph Smith go hungry?
Yeah. It's definitely Joseph Smith.
Yeah, there you go.
How can it be anything different?
Okay. All right. Thanks for letting me have a little bit of fun.
No, that is hilarious. And it's sad at the same time.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. In the New Testament, I wanted to just touch on two ideas that come out of the New Testament that have been really powerful passages and phrases used in the church throughout the history of the church. One is from Ephesians 1:10, which refers to the dispensation of the fullness of times. We're all familiar with that in the dispensation of the fullness of times, he might gather in one all things in Christ, both which are in heaven and which are on earth, even in him. So the interesting thing here is we take that idea, just the term dispensation. Again, we don't really try to dig in and find out what was the underlying Greek, or what do Bible commentators or scholars say about this dispensation. What are alternative translations? What do they say about that? The LDS Bible Dictionary defines a dispensation as a period of time when the Lord has at least one servant on the earth who holds the keys of the priesthood and is authorized to administer the gospel. We're all familiar with that concept. A dispensation, it's an epoch, a period of time. And so the LDS interpretation of this prophecy is that it is talking about a future period or dispensation in which all truths, powers, blessings, keys and everything.
Yeah, don't forget keys. Yeah.
That have ever been on the earth in any preceding period of time or dispensation. Okay. Now, scholars tell us, to the contrary, that a dispensation has nothing to do with a period of time. It is not a period of time or an epoch, a common but erroneous use of the word, but rather it is a mode of dealing, an arrangement or administration of affairs. So the underlying Greek is oikonomia, from which we get the word economy.
Now, where are you getting that from, Charlie?
That's the Greek translation of 110. That's in my book too, in the chat.
Yeah, I was just asking in case you're reading. It's on page 59 of your book, but it's one of my very, very favorite commentary analysis of Greek words. That's out of Vine's Expository.
Oh, yeah. Vine's Expository.
For those of you who want to get into really superb Greek information, go to Vine's. He's good. He's real good. It's a little bit older, but he's real good.
Yeah, it is older, but
I was happy to see that you were going to that. That's why I brought that up.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, okay, I see. Yeah. So that is from him. And
so how did Joseph Smith get from this theme of dispensation to the one he's gotten to? Do we know?
So as Vine's Expository Dictionary explains, that a common but erroneous use of the word is a period of time. It was a common, that's the popular way of thinking about it. How do we get to think that way in the church today? So there was the guy that developed dispensationalism, that really formalized it, was a guy named John Nelson Darby, who by 1830 and early 1830s had articulated this idea of 7 dispensations or periods of time.
You mean even that wasn't Joseph Smith?
No. That's been around. So Joseph Smith he was a sponge, right? He just picked that stuff up. So that was just a very layperson's understanding of dispensation without being critical or understanding, reading the Greek and trying to understand what the passage is actually saying.
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Well, that really undercuts an anchor here.
Oh, yeah.
This is pretty serious.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we say. This is the dispensation of the fullness of time.
This is bigger than the Old Testament prophecies not being Old Testament prophecies, from my opinion.
Yeah.
This is huge.
I think it is. I agree. So for Paul, and we're not sure, if he wrote Ephesians or not, but at least this is his tradition. Right. But in his epistles and in the Pauline literature, there were 2 dispensations or ways in which God dealt with Israel, right? Israel and his people. One was the Mosaic dispensation, and the other was the dispensation of Christ. And those were the two, what Paul called the dispensation of grace. So we don't have the law. We're not under the dispensation or the way of governance of the law. That was the old way God dealt with his people, the old economy. We're under this new economy now that began with Christ's advent, called the dispensation or the economy of grace. So it has nothing to do with periods of time.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's not a prophecy. It's not a prophecy either of a future time, but a declaration that we are in the current. Yeah, this is it.
This is it.
We are in the dispensation of the fullness of times.
This is it. The grace period.
That's right.
So see, that ties in pretty good, doesn't it? Don't you think? With Paul thinking that the second coming is just right around the corner. Exactly. I mean, it's so close. Don't even bother getting married. No, don't go buy a house, and don't ever think about building $1 billion mall in Jerusalem.
Yeah,
because that won't work.
Yeah, and that's why he was telling people, don't even bother getting married, because this current way of the world is going to be changing here very soon. Okay, so any other questions, comments on that one, Carrie? Or
no, you're really giving us some great stuff here. No, keep going.
We've got the one more, the last one, which is my favorite, the restoration or the restitution of all things.
Oh, that's got to be Acts.
Acts 3, 19 to 21. Yeah. We all recognize that as missionaries and preach that.
Remember when Jack Welch from Farms did that big Ensign article on the various words of the restoration within Mormonism, and he made a big. It was Ensign 1994-5 or whatever, when Farms was at their peak. He did a huge study on this Acts 3.
Interesting. I don't remember that. I'll have to.
Yeah. If you can, I can't remember which ensign it was in, but I still have it somewhere. It's in my notes somewhere.
Okay. We'll post it in the notes.
Yeah, but he actually got it published in the Ensign.
Interesting. So we're all familiar with repent, Paul says, or Peter says, repent ye therefore, be converted, that your sins may be blotted out, when the times of refreshing shall come from the presence of the Lord, and he shall send Jesus Christ, which was before preached unto you, whom the heavens must receive until the times of the restitution of all things, which God hath spoken by the mouth of all his holy prophets since the world began. So it's so
there you have it, Charlie.
So major. All the this is what they talked about.
This is Mormonism right here.
Exactly. They all saw it. They all prophesied of our day when all things would be restored. Of course, with the ongoing restoration, all things haven't been restored yet. So we're backpedaling a little bit.
We're chugging along.
Right.
Line upon line, precept by precept,
Yes, right.
That other mistranslation from the Bible, the Mormons love to use. Right. Wow. They can't win, can they? It's either mistranslated or misinterpreted. Holy cow. Wow. So we can say we believe in Mormonism as long as it is translated and interpreted correctly.
As long as it is translated and interpreted the way that we say it should be, right? We've got a closed circle here, closed circular reasoning.
Yeah, I call that inbred scholarship in Mormonism, truly.
Yeah. And this is what drives non-LDS scholars crazy at scholarly conferences, biblical conferences, Society of Biblical Literature, when they get this kind of closed LDS view of the scripture in their talking to them. You just cannot, they just say, wow, we just cannot talk to these people this way. Again, that's
Robert Rittner mentioned that about John Gee's materials in the discussion with on Mormon stories. He said when John and Radio Free Mormon again, he's everywhere. He's awesome, man. Don't tell him I said that; it'll swell his fat head. I'll tell him next weekend at Thrive. But Rittner actually told John. He said, "No Egyptologist is going to give any LDS Egyptologist 1 second of their time when it comes to this Book of Abraham, there and the papyri." Not 1 second, because we know you guys just don't see it the way it's supposed to be. You can't. You're carefully groomed down a particular trail that you have to follow, and it is not the Egyptological trail. From my take on this tonight, you're saying the same thing appears to be with the biblical trail.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm not often saying that, am I?
Yeah. And I do not want to generalize here. I know.
No, I love your specifics.
I know the current faculty at BYU, they are very well educated, very informed on biblical scholarship. They understand, they know the Bible. It's the tradition that we have, the culture that we have developed and ingrained ourselves into. As you say, we're kind of in a rut, and we can't, no matter, it's going to take a long time, several generations to get out of that rut. And, but we're moving there slowly. It's just very slow.
Yeah.
Okay. Back to this restoration of all things. What's interesting about this is, in context and the way scholars explain this, and it's very obvious if you read it, the verses before and after, that it's talking about redemption, the restoration, the restitution of all things from the ravages of sin. In other words, we're going back to, the Edenic state of the earth, that we're going to be restored. Christ is going to cleanse the world from sin, right? And restore all things back to holiness and pureness. Okay, that's the general notion of what this passage is all about. Now, at the time of Joseph Smith, there are several strands of interpretation of this passage. One of them is the one that I just mentioned, that is kind of the straightforward meaning of it. But the other one is what Restorationists adopted, which is that the restoration of all things is the restoration of primitive Christianity, largely, although it can also encompass the restoration of the earth and of all humankind. But Joseph Smith didn't pick up on that, and that doesn't appear in the Book of Mormon, that kind of restoration. The restoration spoken of in early Mormonism is the one that he picks up the discourse between universalists and anti-universalists. And Dan Vogel, by the way, has written really some excellent material on universalism or anti-universalism in the Book of Mormon.
Wow.
So what's going on here is Alma is telling his son Corianton that don't think that because it's been said that you're going to be restored, that there's a restoration, that you're going to be restored from wickedness to happiness, or from wickedness to holiness. That doesn't happen. This is exactly what Universalists were promoting at the time of Joseph Smith. This is the dialectic that the Book of Mormon reflects, that debate between evangelicals or anti-universalists and universalists.
Universalists, yeah.
Universalists were saying that it is clear from Acts 3 that it's the restoration of all things. That means everybody is going to be restored in the end at Judgment Day, in the resurrection, to holiness and happiness. That's the fundamental universalist.
It is too, isn't it?
creed.
Yeah.
It is. Anti-universalists were pushing back and saying, no, that's not it. Otherwise, where's agency? Where's judgment? Where's heaven and hell? How does that fit in? So
Yeah.
the Book of Mormon, in that narrative of Alma to Corianton, Alma's saying that, no, it doesn't mean that everybody's going to be restored to holiness and happiness. It only means that everything is going to be restored to its proper order. And interestingly, you find that same argument against universalism in discourses in Joseph Smith's day.
Well, no, wait a minute. This just shows that the ancient Mesoamericans, 300 BC or whatever, had universalists with them.
That is correct. Obviously, they would.
Alma represents the Mormons, Charlie. Come on.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I'm just saying.
And isn't that one of the funny things that makes no sense, that apologists will say, well, they saw our day. Mormon said, I saw I see your day, I know your doings. And so they obviously speak in language that fits our day. But you can't put that kind of dialogue into a Jewish prophet living in 600 BC. That wasn't their discourse. That wasn't their culture to talk about that.
Yeah. It's like Sandra Tanner told me the other day. Just remember, folks, horses are not tapirs.
There you go.
Yep.
Does not work.
Does not work.
So the interesting thing here is the Book of Mormon only talks about a restoration of Israel. Okay, that's all they talk about. The Book of Mormon talks about. And
no priesthood?
No priesthood, no restoration of a priesthood.
Okay.
No restoration of a church.
What?
No restoration of a church or kingdom.
Okay.
Only the restoration of Israel, and implicitly a restoration of gifts, in the sense that you people in the last days are ignoring the gifts. Don't do that. So it implies that maybe those will be turning up again. Mm-hmm. And it talks about a restoration, implicitly, restoration of biblical teachings, right? That were lost, the plain and precious truth.
Yeah, lost from the Bible.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and I talk about that in the subsequent chapter. But in terms of a restoration of all things, it mentions twice in Alma, I think that's Alma 41, where it talks about what we just mentioned, that interpretation from Alma to Korihor. And he says twice, he first of all admonishes Korihor not to rest. Some have wrested the scriptures, supposing the restoration of all things to mean a restoration of all from holiness to happiness.
Yeah, right. I remember that.
That's exactly the argument that the anti-universalists were making in Joseph Smith's day. They were saying that universalists are wresting the scripture, the exact phrase that
they're wrong.
And then Alma at the beginning and at the end emphasizes twice that the restoration of all things spoken of by the mouth of the holy prophets, obviously referring to Acts 3, even though they're not supposed to know about Acts 3, right?
Right.
But it's obvious that he's referring to that it does not refer to a restoration of everyone, but only a restoration of the physical body, right? To perfection.
Yeah.
The spirit is not going to be restored to holiness and happiness unless they repent and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting that after the restoration of the church, after the church is organized, I should say, because they weren't contemplating a restoration of the church at the time. But after the publication of the Book of Mormon, you never hear of the restoration of all things being an anti-universalist polemic. It just vanishes. Instead, all the references for almost the entire first decade of the church, in the 1830s, refers to this restoration of all things, meaning earth, and it takes it very general. It doesn't talk about the wicked being restored to perfection and holiness, but it basically looks at the restoration of the earth to its Edenic state. So the paradisiacal glory of Eden. Okay. That's the restoration that Joseph Smith preaches, Parley Pratt and Voice of Warning. They said the restoration of all things, they interpreted it, Acts 3, 19 to 21, as being a restoration of the earth and all creation to its pristine perfection. So it isn't until the 1830s that you start to see this other strand of restorationism that I talked about that existed in Joseph Smith's day, that seems to have been probably instigated by Rigdon and his emphasis on authority and priesthood, that we have to work this restoration of authority into the narrative because that's important. And so that's when the priesthood narratives or restoration narratives really begin in the mid 1830s.
Well, they really take on special emphasis, if I remember my chronology right, in the 1838 history that Joseph Smith, that's where he starts putting in all the nitty-gritty details.
Yeah. I think the first mention is 1835. Dan probably has
it is, and then it's developed magnificently in the 1838.
Yeah.
But that's because by that time, so many of his followers who were the earlier witnesses of what was going on were excommunicated, and he had sent missionaries to Britain, and the Britain saints were coming over, and Joseph Smith was using them to fill in all the church offices for a while. Yeah, by then McClellan was out, and Whitmer was gone. Oliver Cowdery, with that dirty, nasty little affair that he saw with Joseph Smith, he was gone. So nobody could check Joseph Smith. That's my generalized understanding. But yeah, you're exactly right. So
there were
it shifted again into a more specific priesthood thing then.
So it was almost exclusively, and there are just dozens of quotes by Joseph Smith, all of his associates, that the restoration of all things spoken of in Acts refers to the restoration of the earth to its paradisiacal glory. It's not restoration of a church, of the gospel. Now, obviously, they would envision that that's going to be there when the earth is restored and everything's pure, that Christ is going to rule and reign on the earth. But that was not the teaching at the time. So we've shifted interpretation dramatically.
Do you think maybe he began emphasizing the paradisiacal aspect of the earth and all because he was trying to keep it in people's minds of the New Jerusalem in Missouri? Adam on Diamond and all that, maybe? I don't know. I'm just throwing something out there.
Yeah. Not sure how that all
right.
But very possibly. So, conclusion. There are no actual prophecies in either the Old Testament, in the New Testament, and for that matter, even the Book of Mormon that speaks of a latter-day restoration of a church and priesthood, or Now, I have to exclude the Book of Mormon here because I can say there are no prophecies really in the Bible that talk of Joseph Smith, but clearly there are in the Book of Mormon because he put
You
them.
put him there. Yeah.
But any allusion also to a restoration of all things or to a final dispensation, dispensation of the fullness of times, both of those phrases have reference to something entirely different from what the current LDS understanding is. So I do applaud, though, I got to emphasize again, I applaud scholars in the church who are leading out by at least acknowledging this fact that those are not prophecies of Joseph Smith, and the restoration of all things and dispensation of fullness of times refers to something entirely different. And I'm just hoping that that will help steer the church in a more defensible, reasonable, informed direction.
Yeah. That's awesome. I actually have a good friend, the BYU scholar Trevin Hatch,
Yeah, he did.
who is taking this direction into more of the Jewish manner of understanding Jesus. So perhaps he might be part of that overall general trend of saying, let's let the texts say and mean what the texts say and mean, instead of saying Jesus was a Mormon.
Right.
That's as silly as the Christian saying, yeah, well, Jesus was obviously a Christian,
Yeah.
So it's like the Christian lady saying, well, if the King James language is good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me because it's in the Bible. Things like that. You go, okay, well.
Jesus spoke King James English, right?
So, yeah. Oh, man, Charlie, this has been so much fun for me. Quite a fun, man. We could count this as a late night Sunday school. As far we'll call it the fireside. I was calling it the Sunday night fireside. So, but yeah. Hey, you guys in the audience, I know you've been completely ignoring us and talking Shakespeare half the night.
Yeah, they've been having fun.
That's all right. They'll come back and watch the video. But do you have any questions other than Shakespeare questions for Charlie that you'd like to ask? And I know why you've gone to Shakespeare. RFM.
If it's RFM, he thinks and talks in Shakespearean.
He does. I mean, the man is an animal. That's how he is. So don't tell him I said that. If you don't have any questions here in just a couple of minutes, Charlie. Oh, he has a prior question. What was it, Doug? Or if Emmy says had a prior question. How did DNC 87? Oh, hey, my good friend Mark Schultz. Welcome, my friend. Good to see you here. How did DNC 87 get backdated? Proof. Well, that's the DNC 87.
Is that the one of the wheat and the tares? The new.
I'm looking right now. I got my DNC handy. Revelation given on war. Oh yeah, the section was the brethren were reasoning upon African slavery and slavery of the children and men throughout the world. Yeah, this is the great war prophecy, the Civil War.
Oh, that's the war prophecy. Yeah,
the northern states and the southern states and all that. So that may not be a question to you, Charlie. Maybe he's asking it from someone else.
Oh, yeah, but that was given at the time. It was just they held on to it. It wasn't published for a long time. I'm not sure that was necessarily backdated as it was
held on to
post fulfillment published almost.
Yeah, it was a few years later that it happened, wasn't it?
Yeah. But the problem with that is that most of the stuff that it talks about in section 87 never materialized. So a war did break out, but it didn't break out in the way that it says it was going to. It didn't pull in all of the nations of the earth.
Well, it did later in World War I, you skeptic.
Right. And it didn't didn't terminate in, the total destruction and Armageddon.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. Yeah.
and the Lamanites didn't get,
Blossom as a rose. Oh.
as it says in it.
First published when, he's asking. Well, it says the revelation and prophecy was given December 25th, 1832.
Yeah.
So when was it first published? It wasn't published for quite a few years after that, was it?
Yeah, yeah. If
I
you
don't have any of my history books with me, Mark.
Yeah, you could go to the Joseph Smith Papers Project site, and they'll tell you the whole history behind it.
Yeah, that's true.
But it was not in the original Doctrine and Covenants when it could have been published, in 1833,
Right.
35.
Here's a question. What's the take on ongoing restoration? You mentioned that earlier. Would you explain that a little bit more in today's church? Why are they going that direction?
Yeah, what used to be called restoration had reference to the major events of bringing back the church, right? Of we got to get the keys back on the earth. We got to get the church organized with its basic offices of apostles and prophets and so on. But now what we call restoration are these little tweaks, fine-tuning things that they would have previously just called, hey, we're making a policy change, right? We're shifting the way we do things slightly, and would not have called it a restoration. That didn't fit into that definition of restoration. So that's what's going on now. Nothing is being restored. Things are just being tweaked,
fine-tuned.
Policies or a new program here or there, or a woman gets to offer a prayer or something in general conference, and that's
and hey, by the way,
that is huge.
In state conference and sacrament meeting now, the women now have the authority to play with that little stand button to raise the stand higher.
Oh, yes.
Back.
Yeah, that's been restored.
That's critically important to seeing the Book of Mormon is the most correct book.
Right.
Don't ask me how. It has something to do with Reformed Egyptians somewhere down the road.
Yeah.
So Dan was saying it was first published in 1851 in the
Great Price.
CRFM's question on Messiah ben Joseph. I can't look back and see that far, Doug. Sorry. Hold on, I'm looking. I love you too, Mark Schultz. You're awesome, dude. Don't argue with me. He said, Dan says it wasn't published in 1835, probably because the nullification crisis of 1832 passed. And I saw his comment earlier that they were afraid that things were going to go bad in 1832.
Yeah, it was the writing was on the wall, right? I mean, knew that we were heading towards a crisis,
right,
at that time. So it was published before the Civil War. I can't remember when it became part of the Doctrine and Covenants. Was it in 79 or later? But anyway, the history is interesting. But the point is that was there in 1832. It was written. But the big question is, was that really fulfilled the way that, if you take it at face value, what it's saying, was it fulfilled the way that it describes?
Yeah. Yeah, and here's RFM's question that has nothing to do with, it does, but the Messiah ben Joseph in 2 Nephi 3. Yeah, I've actually seen this before too. The fruit of thy loins in Judah, and the fruit of thy loins will write, and out of our weaknesses. And Joseph prophesied, the seer, the Lord bless. Yeah, this is the seer Joseph coming from Joseph of Egypt. And so there you have it. Book of Mormon, the most correct book, verifying that Joseph of Egypt in the ancient Bible had this prophecy of Joseph Smith, but wicked and conniving men later took it out.
Yeah.
Granted, we don't have that manuscript evidence of Genesis yet, but who knows? I mean, we found the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi. Come on, where's your faith?
Yeah. So they just happen to lose those pieces that refer to specifically Joseph Smith or the Book of Mormon, Isaiah 29.
Yeah. And the reason why, Charlie, is because they were jealous that it wasn't them. And so you've got to take out the stuff for Joseph Smith.
Yeah. Makes sense.
I'm just saying, when you think this stuff out, it all works, really crazily. That's how it works.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Okay, you guys, any other questions? Hold on. Now I got to scroll down. Woo. This is the greatest show. Oh, Doug Vincent, thank you. You're very kind. Mark Schultz, my friend and new brother. We are working to getting Mark on our show, just so you know, and we will do so. So just to let you know, we have some superstars in our chat, and I'm stone cold serious. Mark Schultz is a world champion wrestler, as well as an Olympic champion wrestler. And we honor you here, my friend, and we will honor you with coming on my show soon. So, hey, T.O. is here, and I love T.O. He's also been on my show. BYP, here we go. Let me put this up for you, Charlie. BYP, how has Charlie's book been received by LDS apologist scholars? Any pushback? Are you treated with kindness? Of course he's treated with kindness. I have him on my show. Oh, wait.
Yeah, so here's one LDS apologist treating me. Oh, ex-apologist.
It's just two little letters. Yeah, how are you? How are you being received? That's a good question, actually.
I don't tend to mingle in circles where I'm not received well. So I avoid.
Folks, you just saw the IQ of a genius. That's been my problem, is I do mingle with those guys, and I waste a lot of time arguing over idiocies like, why can't I call you Mormon? Well, I want to be called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saintium. Yeah.
So I do mingle with a lot of LDS scholars who are very courageous. I mean, most LDS scholars that I would call real legit scholars don't take themselves too seriously, and they recognize that there's a lot we don't know. We don't know even a small fraction of what we think we know, or what the church professes to know. So I think there's a lot more epistemic humility among most scholars, to where they're pretty easygoing. They're not so dogmatic about a particular position.
No, that's very nice to know that is beginning to occur. Seriously. Yeah, that's very nice. There was another one by my good friend Moksha Raver. I love this guy. Could you say something about the white horse prophecy?
That isn't in my book.
That's all you have to say, Charlie.
Sorry, not my book. And I used to, back in the decades ago, that used to be a really popular thing, the white horse prophecy. I used to read all the materials on it, but that has not been one of my pet pursuits. I'll just say that.
Thank you, Doug Vincent, for your marvelous contribution. That's very nice. I wanted to recognize you. Keep the fantastic guests coming. I will. You included, pal. You're not done being on my show either, Doug, but thank you. That's very kind.
I thought that Erie Canal episode was really spectacular.
Wasn't that fun? Doug did such excellent research on that. I mean, he just worked his butt off on that. I was deeply impressed. So yeah, and I want him on too because we've got other subjects that Doug really is brilliant at, and so this will be fun to, it's kind of fun just getting a whole variety of stuff, isn't it?
Mhm.
It really is. So okay, let's see what else. Oh, I'm not going to talk about DesNat. I don't give a damn about DesNat. Oh, sorry. Whoops. I said I wasn't going to say anything. Okay, let's see. Let me see. I thought I saw one other one. Well, anyway, we have had. Oh yeah, I got TOs. We have had a Charlie. I've enjoyed this one as much as any of them. I mean, I really like how you get into you did a good job covering the broadness, but you really got into some good specifics. I love that kind of research and discussion because it's important to.
Wow.
I mean, the devil's in the details. That's
It
not
is.
cliche. That's for real. You get to the Greek and look what you did with that word restoration. Well, that's pretty dang important, right? So I love that. So
It's easy to just generalize and say, well, does the Bible really prophesy of this stuff? But if you go in and you look at individually, what are all these prophecies that the church is claiming are saying a particular thing? What are they actually saying when read in context? And what's the scholarly perspective on them? And wow, it's eye-opening.
it is. It is. That's why I encourage you guys truly. This is such a fun book for that reason. This is my doctrine, the development of Mormon theology. And there are very, very, very many subjects. It's not just a one subject book. He covers like 30 different areas, 30 different ideas, doctrines, or historical interpretations and themes that really are significantly different with the way the world looks at this stuff as compared to how, but as compared to how Mormonism has. But and I'm agreeing with Charlie here because I've been kind of talking behind the scenes with a few people too. And it's one reason why Dan and I want to get together and do our series. And we're going to have some other people on. I'm going to have Trevin. I know T.O. and I have some more series to do where the scholarship is kind of, I'm going to say this, correct me if I'm wrong, Charlie, but I'm hoping I'm seeing that there is a better maturity to the scholarship from the Mormon end, meaning, for instance, we now have Mormon scholars like Thomas Wayman, who has actually translated the New Testament now. And I bought his book. I want to do this New Testament commentary series, which I'm so far behind on now because I'm having way too much fun doing my BYP responds stuff. But yeah, this idea that now they're beginning to actually translate the scriptures, and they are being, Trevin Hatch is able to go to the Jewish culture when it comes to Jesus, etc., and draw different conclusions than what the Sunday school manuals do. And he's not getting in trouble. He's actually being praised for it and very properly show. So they're doing a better honor for the elevation of the BYU image is how I would say it, simply because they're not so stuck doing faith promoting stuff that we all know basically. And I apologize in advance to any Mormon who's offended, but guys, it's late enough in the day. We know most of us just bull roar. The faith promoting stuff. Come on, give us a little bit more credit. We've done our homework.
Yeah.
And part of our homework, seriously, is the man I have on my screen right here with this book. I say that very sincerely. So, Charlie, I appreciate you, man. I love you. You're awesome. We will be doing this again shortly, you guys. Next weekend, that's the announcement I wanted to say. Next weekend, I'm going to be down in St. George at Thrive over Sunday. I'm going to try to get on live. It depends on their Wi-Fi connections or whatever. If not, I won't be doing a Radio Free Mormon. Radio Free Mormon and I are going to get together and do some lives while we're there too, I hope. But we're going to be pretty busy. He's quite popular, so people are going to mob him like the crowds did Jesus. But I'm going to try next week to do a Thrive live. Hey, that'd be cool. If not, please forgive me. I'll try to get everything as much as I can recorded. And when I get back Monday, I'll be back late Monday. And then Tuesday, I'll begin working on it. So I'll start posting it sometime next week. But keep an eye open on Sunday night, just in case I can actually make this, or Sunday. Sunday might even be better. Although Radio Free Mormon is the final speaker at Thrive, and I don't want to be doing a live interrupting him while he's off there gallivanting on the podium, receiving accolades and applause. So anyway, I'm just letting you know there could be some iffy things, probably not, maybe so. We'll see. I will try my very golly gosh darndest to put up some material. So that's how it works. Thank you again, Charlie. I appreciate it. Do you have anything you'd like to
be on
with?
No, I've just enjoyed being on, and good luck in your trip down south next week.
I think it'll be fun. It will. It'll be fun to get to a little bit warmer place for a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah. What's the temperature there? You're there now, aren't you?
Oh, it's in the 60s today.
Oh, wow.
Very nice.
I'm taking my tank top and shorts. That's suntan weather right there.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, you guys. We love y'all. We appreciate everybody in the audience. It's been a fun audience. We have had a great time expounding on the scriptures in sincerely a meaningful way. So thank you so much again, Dr. Harrell. We will be getting back together soon for more exegesis and scriptural learning. So
awesome.